What's up, hockey fans? Welcome to the Hockey News Playoff Frenzy Live, brought to you by Sticks.com. I am Emma Lingen. I'm joined by Michael Tracos. We are coming at you live, of course, to talk about round one, game three between the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Ottawa Senators. Of course, Toronto takes the game in OT once again, final score 3-2. Wherever you're watching us on YouTube, X, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, any of the hockey news platforms, we encourage you to send us all of your questions and comments about the Sens and the Leafs. We would love to answer them and talk about them here with you. And we thank you for joining us tonight and hanging with us through overtime. Of course, we've also got other games going on right now. We have game 3 between the Vegas Golden Knights and the Minnesota Wild. We'll make sure to keep you updated on that one. Minnesota currently leads 2-1 in that game. And we've also got Winnipeg and St. Louis going on as well, with St. Louis taking the early 2-0 lead. So
Wow.
before we do get to all of that and more, with a special focus on this game between the Leafs and the Sens, do want to remind you that we are brought to you by Sticks.com. You can get pro-level composite sticks without the price tag at Sticks.com. So why break the bank on sticks? Go to Sticks.com, that's Stix.com, and gear up without the markup. All right, Michael.
Yes.
How are you tonight? I just did really
I'm pretty
long
happy. I've got a colleague in Jonathan Tuvell who is a huge Ottawa Senators fan. So I know I'm going to be giving it to him tomorrow because the series looks like it's over, Emma. I don't know how you're viewing it, but 3-0.
Well, it's the Battle of Ontario. I mean, you got to give it to them when you have that opportunity. But yeah, I think looking at this whole series, I mean, like you said, 3-0. Now, 2 of the games have required overtime, and yet it still feels very much like you said, like the Leafs are the better team, kind of far and away. They look like the team that is, the playoffs are not too big for them. They look like the team that's been here before, and the Senators look like the team that haven't been here in a very, very long time. So I want to talk about this game in particular. It started off, it was really not on the score sheet. It was still 0-0, but just in terms of shots, it was all Ottawa early. And once again, Anthony Stolarz comes in. He's the difference maker for the Leafs. I mean, I think the Leafs were down 6-1 in shots at one point in the first period. So he really kept them in that game. Again, we talked about this the last time we talked about the Leafs and Stolarz, but how much is he going to be? We spend so much time talking about Matthews, Nylander, Marner, all of those guys, but how much is Anthony Stolarz in the goaltending situation just really kind of carried this team through this series so far?
Yeah, right now you've got no complaints about Anthony Stolarz's game. Through 3 games, he's outplaying Linus Ullmark, and it's really not even close. Like game 1, Ullmark just looked awful. I would argue that in games 2 and 3, it's been a little bit more even. That being said, Ottawa really needed Ullmark to steal this one, and instead, it was just a mediocre performance again by him. I don't want to say he was awful, because when you've got Austin Matthews scoring in a game, it's kind of hard. Right now, the core 4 for Toronto has been putting up, they've got 5 goals and 18 points in 3 games. So, if that's going to happen, then, this is what the result's going to be. And this is sort of the result that we haven't been seeing when the Leafs had been playing the Boston Bruins in previous playoff rounds. So they're getting the performance from their big guys. And on the other end, like, I'm looking at Dylan Cousins, who came over to the Ottawa Senators at the deadline. He's got no goals, Emma. So, it can't just be Brady Tkachuk, and it can't just be, relying on Ullmark to steal a game. You're going to need your Tim Stutzlas. You're going to need your Drake Bathersons, and you're going to need your Dylan Cousins. And other secondary scoring if you're going to hope to challenge Toronto. But down 3-0, it feels like this ship has sailed.
Yeah, it really does. We've said this before that Toronto doesn't really need the goalie to steal them games, but he's kind of doing it anyway. And Ottawa's the team that needs their goalie to steal games, and it's not happening. It seemed like maybe the tide was turning in Ottawa's favor early. Of course, the Sens get that 5-on-3 power play opportunity
Hmm.
early in the second period. That was obviously a make or break moment. I mean, if they hadn't scored there, then I would say this series really was over. But I think obviously Claude Giroux was able to score, give them the lead. It wasn't even really the hardest shot that he took there. It kind of, I
No.
think, it just kind of caught the Leafs off guard. Everyone expected him to pass, and he shot it. And Brady Tkachuk had the perfect screen in front. So, how do you think that? Again, it's still good that the Sens are able to capitalize on those moments, and they're not completely falling apart in those moments where they need to score. They need to score in those games. But then again, the lead didn't last for long. So how much of that and being able to hold a lead and maintain a lead do you think is something that maybe the Sens aren't used to, and maybe that's something that they haven't been able to quite capture here in the playoffs?
The Sens look like the Leafs, how the Leafs did, about 7 years ago. When the Leafs were just getting their feet wet and playing the Washington Capitals in their first playoffs with the Mitch Marner, Austin Matthews, William Nylander era. That's where that's what I'm seeing out of the Sens right now. And our good friend Michael Agello, I just saw him enter the chat saying the Leafs look composed, and they don't, like, when they were down 1-0, you didn't really worry. And even blowing the third period lead going into overtime, I think the Leafs felt better about the fact that they could probably win this again than the Senators did. So, this is a learning experience, and I don't think Ottawa fans really want to hear that, is the fact that, you made the playoffs. That's step one. Now you got to learn how to win in the playoffs. That's step two. And, to their credit, the Leafs are still trying to figure out that step two. Like, let's be honest, they've won one playoff round since they drafted Austin Matthews. That's obviously not good enough. And that's not the path that Ottawa wants to take. But they waited 7 years to get here. And I think there was maybe, in the back of a lot of people's heads. And we were talking to Steve Warren, our Ottawa Senators site editor, about this. And, he said that, the Ottawa Senators are not just happy to be in the dance. They want to go far, and they want to beat the Leafs, and they want to challenge for, challenge the big dogs, whether it's Florida, whether it's Tampa or whomever, and try to get to the Stanley Cup final. It's like they waited this long and they're hoping to go all the way. Obviously there's still learning pains here. They don't look like a complete team, whether it's the power play, which, finally connected on a goal, or the goaltending, or just the inability to kind of get the big goal. Like, it can't, like I said, it can't just be Brady Tkachuk, but right now it just looks like he's a one-man team, even as hobbled as he looks right now.
Yeah, for sure. And again, it even took that 5-on-3 for them to finally score. And for it wasn't even for lack of trying either. I mean, I had mentioned this before that they've actually outshot Toronto in all 3 games of this series. Is that something that you think, I mean, clearly it hasn't mattered at the end of the day for Toronto, but getting outshot this consistently, do you think it's something that will catch up with the Leafs at all in this series?
There's getting outshot, and then there's getting outchanced. And I think, like, I was at game 3 and talking to some of the Leafs. Anthony Stolarz, described them as junk shots. Basically, they're getting shots on the goaltender, but are they shots that Stolarz is worried that he has to make a grade A stop on? Probably not. At the other end, Toronto's, you know, their shots, it's a matter of quality over quantity. Like, you saw, William Nylander was on a breakaway. There's a number of times where, whether it was Matthews trying to wrap around, or Nyes at the front of the net, or even Max Domi charging the net, taking the puck hard there. Like, those are shots and opportunities and chances where you're going, like the puck definitely could go in. Or on the other end, it just feels like Ottawa was just trying to send pucks in on traffic, and they were easy saves. So I that's one where I know the analytics and the underlying numbers are, the people who believe in a lot of that are going to say, well, you do enough of that, and it tells you that you've got the puck a lot of the night, and you're controlling the pace, and the game is in your hands. From what I saw, I didn't see a Leaf team that was in trouble. I saw a Leaf team that was just, look composed. They look like, that they felt very much in control of the game, and the results kind of speak for themselves. Like Simon Benoit, what was that? Less than 2 minutes into the overtime, fires a shot, and I don't know if Allmark saw it, but we're seeing this too many times now where the Leafs just, Craig Berube hockey. It's boring. Um, they don't look rattled. They're not playing that run and gun style. It's a very mature Leaf team, and I thought I'd never utter those words, and I've been covering this team for almost 20 years now.
Never thought we'd see the day, but they do. They look very composed. They don't look like the moment's too big for them. They don't look frantic. They don't look panicked. I think, you mentioned Benoit scoring the overtime winner. How about the both OT winners, Benoit and Max Domi, on a team with Nylander, Matthews, Marner, Tavares, but those are the overtime winners. I think that that's something that speaks volumes about this Leafs team too, is that you're seeing more depth through the lineup, and you're not just relying so much. I mean, you still want your top guys to be your top guys, of course, but you're not relying on them so much, and you are getting clutch scoring from throughout the lineup, I think. Again, if you are just joining us now on any of the many platforms that we are coming to you live on, this is the Hockey News Playoff Frenzy Live. We are brought to you by Sticks.com. I'm Emma Lingen. He is Michael Tracos. We are talking about the Leafs and the Senators, but a quick check in just around the league again. We've still got St. Louis up 2-0 over Winnipeg with about 5 minutes left in the first period, and we are just at first intermission in Vegas, Minnesota, and Minnesota is leading 2-1. That is rather surprising to me. We will get to that one in a little bit, Michael. I want to talk some more, though, about the Leafs and the Sens tonight. We talked about Allmark. He hasn't been bad for Ottawa by any stretch, but he's been fine. I would say he's been fine. But this is a team that needs a goalie to be more than fine. I mentioned earlier the lack of shots that he's faced. Just, again, not saying that it's a bad thing that the Leafs are focusing on quality of shots over quantity. However, talk to a lot of goaltenders over the years, and they'll be the first to tell you that those games where you're not facing a high shot volume end up being the more challenging ones, because you kind of can get lulled into submission a little bit there when you're not facing shots. I mean, I think in the second period, Toronto didn't register a shot on goal for the first 8 minutes of the period. So how challenging do you think that is? How much do you think that challenge factors in for Allmark, that, not facing shots, and maybe that is keeping him from staying sharp? How much do you think that has to do with maybe his performance in this series?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. Like, I'm not a goaltender, but I do hear that a lot. Like, some goalies would prefer to get 35 to 40 shots versus 15 to 20. I'm not sure Allmark, I don't know where he falls in that. Like, you got to remember, he played for the Bruins. So, as good as Ottawa plays defensively, the Bruins, especially when they had guys like Patrice Bergeron and David Krejci and Brad Marchand and, a healthy Charlie McAvoy, that was a team that would lock it down and, didn't give a whole lot of opportunities. I just saw a quote, go through my Twitter feed here, and Allmark said he didn't see that goal, or didn't see the Benoit shot. So it's hard to blame him on that one. The Matthews goal, what a pass by Mitch Marner. Again, I don't blame Allmark on that one. Even the Matthew Nyes one, like I don't know how many pucks the Leafs have, or how many goals the Leafs have scored where it looks like, did they even get a blade on the puck? Did it go off a skate? It just seems like every game there's one of those goals. And again, I go back to that's Berube hockey. Under Sheldon Keefe, even under Mike Babcock, this is a team that wowed you with their skill. And don't get me wrong, the Leafs still can put up highlight goal after highlight goal, but as we're seeing in the playoffs, they have no problem scoring the ugly ones. And whether it's Benoit firing a puck from the point, whether it's three guys just crashing the net, and you don't know if it goes off of Matthew's stick or Nye's stick or an Ottawa skate. Again, the Leafs are happy with that one. I just think that they have so many different weapons, and whether it's the first line doing damage, the second line doing damage, like the fact that they've now had 18 points from just their big four, that doesn't include Matthew Nyes, that doesn't include whatever winger happens to play on that second line, and they're getting production from the third line, which has Domi on it. It, this is as deep and as complete a roster as I've seen from Toronto. That being said, the comments from Brady Tkachuk, he's already talking about the Boston Red Sox and how they overcame a 3-0 deficit. So in his mind, it's not over. And I imagine we're going to see like the best that we've seen the Ottawa Senators in game 4. This is going to be, what we were talking about all night. This is going to be up to Allmark to really put a stamp on the series and to show why the Ottawa Senators got him. But it's also going to be an opportunity for some of those other players that I've mentioned, whether it's Stützle, Batherson, or Cousins, to really step up and do what Brady Tkachuk has been doing for 3 games.
Yeah, you'd really like to see some of those other guys step up and defensively as well. I think that guys like Jake Sanderson,
Yeah.
potential Norris candidate, and he's been practically invisible during this series. So I think it's again, like you said, there's getting to the playoffs and then there's winning in the playoffs. And we can tell just in the development timeline that Ottawa is a little bit farther behind Toronto at this point in this series. You mentioned that goal from Austin Matthews, that beautiful pass from Mitch Marner. Again, hard to blame Allmark for that one because that was just an incredible play. I mean, what else can you do at that point? And then the overtime winner that Allmark said he didn't see, that came, off the face-off win from, I think it was Domi who won the face-off. How important has the success in the face-off circle been for Toronto? Because I mean, there's been
That's where
certain
they're
things.
at. Yeah, they're taking over on the faceoff circle.
Yeah, and sometimes that's just a stat that you throw out to be like, "Hey, look, they're whatever percent in the face-off dot." But I think you're seeing actually a direct correlation between the kinds of goals that they're scoring in these games and how, they're winning possession of the puck right away. And they, like you said, they're calm, they're composed, and they know exactly where it's going and who it's going to and where it's going to be. I mean, do you think that success in the face-off circle has something to do with that?
I think so. Like earlier this year, when we were talking about Connor Bedard, it was how brutal he was or has been on on faceoffs. And if you have to start your shift chasing after the puck and trying to retrieve it, it makes it so much harder, especially as a skilled player. And I got the stats in front of me for tonight. Toronto went 62.7% on faceoffs, and Ottawa obviously 37.3%. That is a pretty wild discrepancy. Domi's been good. Obviously, he's a guy that can play on the wing and can take faceoffs, but another guy who's just been solid, so solid this series. I don't have the stats in front of me, but I remember looking at it after game 2, and Austin Matthews has been so dominant in the faceoff circle as well. So, it's a small stat, but we saw it in overtime. You've got an offensive zone faceoff, and had Ottawa won that faceoff, then maybe we're not talking about Leafs being up 3-0. Maybe they go the other way and they end up scoring a goal. So I don't know what you can do at this point in the series to kind of counteract that. It's maybe something that you think about in the offseason is, are we strong enough down the middle? Do we have enough guys that can win the draw? And I'm not so sure that everyone believes that faceoffs are as important a stat. I remember getting into arguments with even coaches saying it's not a big deal. Whatever, you lose the faceoff, you just try to get the puck again. But as we're seeing in the series, it's one of the things, along with the power play, that is making a huge difference in Toronto's favor.
Yeah, the power play has been unreal for Toronto, and it seems like that could be, if the game or the series could be won or lost on special teams, I think was what we were saying early in the series. Now, Toronto just looks so dominant anywhere. 5 on 5, 4 on 3. I mean, it's incredible. So, again, really, really good to see them, kind of clicking now. Like you said, Berube hockey. It's maybe not flashy. It might not be the prettiest goals, but they still count the same. And that's all you need in the playoffs. And speaking of Berube hockey, his former team, the St. Louis Blues, are now up 3-0
Wow.
on the Winnipeg Jets. So Pavel Buchnevich scored twice. He is now on hat trick watch. And then we got Kim Fowler joining the chat for their third goal of the night. And of course, we are still checking in on Minnesota Vegas. Minnesota's still leading 2-1. Again, we invite you, if you were just joining us now, to please send us any of your questions, comments, hot takes, cold takes, and we would love to discuss them here live on the show as we talk about Leafs versus Sens game 3. We've got a viewer question here. How big of an impact do you think Matthews has made being the captain this year, Michael?
I think this year he's made a big impact. Obviously, he didn't have the season that he did a year ago when he had 69 goals, but I would argue that, you know, similar to, and maybe I'm dating myself here, but, Steve Yzerman broke into the league and was a goal scorer and was a guy that was always challenging for at least top 5 in scoring. And it wasn't until he rounded out his game that the Red Wings started winning cup after cup. I wonder if Matthews is undergoing a similar transformation. Obviously, we saw, him finally pot a goal, and I imagine that's going to make him feel good. But even without the offense that was coming from him, and the fact that he hadn't got a goal going into this game, I don't think anyone was really being critical of the kind of game he was playing. Maybe that's because Toronto has so many weapons, but I'm just seeing a more complete, well-rounded game out of number 34. Obviously, it helps when you're playing with Mitch Marner, who is looking like one of the greatest, playmakers right now, and how he's able to distribute the puck. But Austin Matthews is going to get a lot of attention. If the Leafs get past the Ottawa Senators, which it looks like they're going to do, it looks like we're setting up a match with the Florida Panthers, and that's going to be a step up for the Leafs. Obviously, we saw, you know, Alexander Barkov go down. There's no update on, what his health is, but if the Panthers and Barkov are healthy and they play the Leafs in the second round, well, it's going to be Barkov against Matthews. And, that's going to be a matchup that I'm going to be interested in seeing because, it's one thing to go up against Shane Pinto. It's another thing to go against a guy who's probably going to win the Selke again this year. So, back to Matthews. I like the style he's playing. I was talking to Ken Campbell, our senior writer, at the game on Tuesday night, and he was like, "I'm not noticing Matthews on the ice." And I said, "Yeah, that's actually a good thing. It means that fine, he's not scoring or doing anything highlight reel worthy, but he's also, you know, being quiet is maybe a good thing for Austin Matthews right now. There's enough guys that can kind of do the Nylander and Marner stuff. Like he can just go about making sure that his line's not getting scored on and just playing a safe style. And again, I go back to Craig Berube. I think that is a huge, huge impact that he's had on this team. And maybe we're in the sea. He knows that there's a little bit more added responsibility to the kind of game he has to play.
Well, like you said, maybe not a bad thing for Matthews to be quiet in this series. What would have been a bad thing, I think we can all agree, is if Marner had been quiet in this series, because that has been the scarlet A for him that he has not been able to get rid of throughout his career, is that he disappears in the playoffs. He has not disappeared so far in the playoffs. Of course, he's about to earn his next contract wherever that will be. So I think that, you're starting to see what you want from these different guys. We've got a Here's an interesting question. I think that, I mean, we've talked about Stolarz, how incredible he's been for the Leafs. At any point, barring an injury, knock on wood, that doesn't happen to Anthony Stolarz. Do we see Joseph Wall at any point? I mean, at this point, I'm not sure how you can justify taking Stolarz out unless there's an injury.
Easy answer is no, Emma. At the same time, I remember going into the series and Ryan Kennedy, our editor in chief, was saying, you know, I wonder if the Leafs would go Stolarz game 1, Joseph Wall game 2, and just keep rotating back and forth because you look at the season that the Leafs had, Wall played actually more games, and they did have that, traditional tandem. Granted, a lot of times it was injury based, and when Stolarz was out, Wall played, and when Wall was out, Stolarz played more. But I don't think the Leafs would have an issue if they had to go to Joseph Wall. There's a lot of people who still think that Wall is the better goaltender, but yeah, at this point of in the series, I don't see a scenario where he plays in the series. I think at some point we're going to see Joseph Wall, and I think it's going to be not because there's an injury. I think it might be that Stolarz might just cool off a bit. Maybe he has the kind of game that we've seen out of Linus Allmark. And I think with Craig Berube, you've got the luxury where you do have two number one goaltenders and arguably the best goaltending, you know, combined of any team in the playoffs.
Well, one team in the playoffs that definitely does not have two number one goaltenders is the Edmonton Oilers. We are going to get to them in just a minute here. First, I want to wrap up our conversation about the Leafs and the Sens here. We talked about Allmark needing to kind of steal these games for Ottawa. We've talked about we need more guys than just Brady Tkachuk doing things for Ottawa. Other than Allmark, because that's the easy answer, who do you think, if you had to pick one player from Ottawa who needs to show up big in game 4, who would you say?
I'm going Dylan Kuntz. Ottawa traded for this guy. They traded for him just for the playoffs, I think. They saw him as another, Brady Tkachuk type player, a guy that can play a hard, heavy game and provide secondary offense. I don't think they're seeing enough of that offense right now. So that's a big one. The other thing, and it's not a player that the Ottawa Senators just need to do, is stay out of the penalty box. I know the Leafs took more penalties than Ottawa did tonight, but I'm sorry. Even one penalty is too many, especially with the way that Toronto's power play has been. You just cannot afford to take a single penalty. You just can't. If this was a 5-on-5 series from the beginning to the end, we might be looking at Ottawa being up 2-1 or even 3-0. That's how skewed it has been 5-on-5 versus when the Leafs have the man advantage. So, yeah, it's kind of the rookie mistake that we're seeing out of the Sens, that they just keep going to the penalty box, despite the fact that Toronto might have taken more penalties tonight. Again, even one was too many.
Yeah, their power play has just been lethal, especially this series. Uh, Again, Playoff Frenzy live from the Hockey News, brought to you by Sticks.com. I'm Emma Lingen here with Michael Tracos. We are live talking about the 3-2 overtime win for the Toronto Maple Leafs over the Senators in Game 3. Toronto now leads the series 3-0. Michael, before we wrap up tonight, want to just do a quick tour around the league here. Again, we've got St. Louis still up 3-0 over Winnipeg, Minnesota beating Vegas 2-1. Some of the other series going on. Last night, we saw Dallas defeat Colorado in overtime to go up 2-1 in their series. Tyler Seguin with the OT winner for Dallas. How surprising is it, in your opinion, to see Dallas taking the lead early, but still taking the lead in this series, even with all the injuries that they're dealing with and
Mhm.
the really rough, I think it was 7-game losing streak to end the season.
Yeah, a lot of us had written off Dallas when Miro Heiskanen went down, and then Jason Robertson, obviously, with his health status. But they get back Sagan. It looks like Heiskanen might be gearing up, ready to play, and all of a sudden, I'm getting kind of worried for Colorado. Like they had all the feels, Emma, when they brought Landeskog back, and now it's like, do you play him for Game 4? Like, well, what's his status going to be? And we got ourselves a series, obviously. Those 2-3 series are always just a juggernaut. So, yeah, me personally, I had written off Dallas. Now that they're up 2-1, I'm getting a little worried. I still think Colorado should win the series, but then you're looking at the goaltending situation. And I don't know about you, but who would you rather have, Blackwood or Ottinger? I know my answer. It's not Blackwood.
Yeah, no, I mean, well, Blackwood, the way he's been playing early in this series, though, I mean, I
No,
he
but it's still
could.
Blackwood.
I feel you for
I
sure. I would
covered him
take
in the World
Ottinger.
Juniors in Finland, and I'm not saying he cost Canada. I don't know what place they finished. They might have been like 6th or 7th, but that was a team with Mitch Marner, Braden Point, and so many other players. And that was just, he couldn't stop a beach ball. So, yeah,
Yeah.
since then, I'm just done with Blackwood.
Yeah, well, it happens to the best of us, but no, I'd still take Ottinger every time. Ottinger and DeSmith as a tandem, much better, I think, than Blackwood and Wedgwood for Colorado. Speaking of goaltending, you know who does not have goaltending? Edmonton. They lost 6-2 to the LA Kings last night. The Kings chased Skinner. They brought in Calvin Pickard. The fans in LA started chanting, "We want Skinner." Like, it was just ruthless. So, in your opinion, now you've got, we were talking about Toronto having two number one goalies. Well, Edmonton seems to have two number two goalies right now. So who
Yeah.
would you start in game 3, Skinner or Pickard?
I would go Pickard, and it's almost like pick your poison. But at the same time, I've seen enough of Skinner. He didn't have a great regular season. I think there was some thinking that he was going to do what he did last year and then all of a sudden just turn into a superhuman when the playoffs started. Obviously, that hasn't happened. Granted, that's a really good LA team. Like what we're seeing at a Quinton Byfield right now is the evolution of just one of the game's top power forwards. And then Adrian Kempe has just looked really good all season long. So a nice coming out party for Byfield, who is from my neck of the woods up here in Newmarket. But yeah, whether it's Pickard, whether it's Skinner, I think a lot of it's on Edmonton's defense. I think we all we all talked about how Matthias Ekholm was such a huge loss. We're seeing that right now. Evan Bouchard just looks really bad in the defensive end. He's basically, costing the Oilers the series as well. So add it all up, they both basically need both goalies in there at the same time if they're hoping to turn this series around.
All right. Well, that is going to do it for tonight's conversation. Again, Ottawa dropping game 3 to Toronto. Toronto wins 3-2. They lead the series 3-0. We've got St. Louis up 3-0 over Winnipeg, and Minnesota now up 3-1 over Las Vegas in their game. So definitely some good games going on. We will let you all go and check those out now. Once again, this has been the Hockey News Playoff Frenzy Live. We are here every night during the playoffs, live and in person, to talk about the big games and the big storylines from the night. So we appreciate all of you for tuning in, sending us your questions, your comments, your hot takes. We love hearing from you, and we love getting to talk hockey with you. So thank you again to Stix.com for sponsoring us. Thank you again, Michael, for chatting with me tonight. Once again, I am Emma Lingen, and this has been Playoff Frenzy Live. We will see you tomorrow.